Oh, Nikos here too.
Yay.
Hello.
My
Hello.
favorite Nikos.
Um, so Nikos, are you familiar with Reed? What was this guy's name? Reed? What, with Grand Central in New York. What was his name? Henry Hope Reed? No,
Say it again.
the guy you introduced in that video that I from like 20 years ago. I saw that this video
Henry
of a
Hope
young.
Reed. He
Oh yeah, Henry
saved
Hope.
Grand Central together with Jackie Kennedy. He was the only traditionalist, the only classicist left in New York in the 60s. He was a lone voice. It's an unbelievable story. There were a few older practitioners still working after World War II, mostly for rich clients and rather not very, they were the enemy. They were devils, so they didn't really show their face in public. They were almost embarrassed to do what they did. He was the only public voice of that.
Well, and he joined forces with Jane Jacobs, the great urbanist.
Oh really?
Yes, to try to save parts of New York City. And surprise, surprise, the biggest shock of all, Philip Johnson joined them.
Yes. No, Philip Johnson understood a lot more than people give him credit for.
But they lost Pennsylvania Station, the battle for Pennsylvania Station. That was destroyed.
That was destroyed. It wasn't even a it wasn't even an issue,
It was perfectly working, perfectly functional, in excellent form, excellent shape. Some rapacious developer, whose name I know, I'm not going to mention it, just bought the place, tore the thing down, and he.
Is that Silverman? Who was it?
No. Silverman is the World Trade Center.
Right.
No. So, this is much older. This is in the 60s.
Yeah, I don't know the names.
Some rapacious, New York billionaire. And he made some repeated snide remarks in the New York Times that, people are shouting about this and the protesting, but they'll forget about it and they'll come to love what we build on the side. Well, one of the ugliest buildings in New York City is today's Pennsylvania Station.
What is it? What do they put instead? Is it a housing building or what?
No, it's some stupid skyscraper. It's ugly skyscraper.
They put on Penn Station, they put Madison Square Gardens.
Oh, that's where that is.
And I don't think there's anything over the station. There's a tall building over it.
Yeah, there's a tall building. The guy, the investor, made a lot of money because he put a skyscraper on top of the station. Before there was just a station. But the station now is just a basement of this skyscraper. It's horrible place.
So Philip Johnson joined them and was like, hey, let's preserve these great buildings.
Philip Johnson actually marched with Jane Jacobs on Park Avenue, carrying big placards, Save Pennsylvania Station. Now, I happen to be best friends with Stanford White's great-grandson and great-grandnephew when I studied in Long Island. Stanford White was the architect of Pennsylvania Station. McKim, Mead, and White was the firm that the builder, but Stanford White was the principal architect for Pennsylvania Station. Unfortunately, he died rather young. He was shot by a jealous lover. Stanford White was having an affair with a pretty young woman, and her lover, shot Stanford White. So America lost its greatest living architect.
Yeah, he was an asshole, though. Nobody liked him. He was really, he was abusive to everybody around him.
Really?
In the office. Oh, yeah. If he came to a site and he didn't like what he saw built, he'd knock it down with a hammer. He was not a polite man. And he was also the younger of McKim, Mead, and White. He was the youngster. McKim was the designer. Mead was the businessman. And White was supposed to be the young whippersnapper.
Anyway. Okay, so let's get, what's the topic of today's webinar?
Anything we feel like talking about? Oh, I was curious also. So how did you mention one time that Philip Johnson blocked Mendelssohn's career, Eric Mendelssohn's career, from going certain places? I was just
because Philip Johnson was a card-carrying Nazi, and then and
Was he really?
was a Jew.
Yeah. He was a very strong Nazi sympathizer. And when he did the modern architecture show at MoMA, he was featuring it was ABJ, all but Jews. So that
Wait, wasn't Liebskin in there?
Gropius, what?
Wasn't Liebskin in that exhibit?
No.
We're talking 1930s.
We're talking about 1930s, the
Liebskin
modern
was
architecture.
non-existent, even as a
You are confusing
concept.
Ara.
Yeah.
Philip Johnson did two major shows, one in the 30s and then one in the 80s. The one in the 30s was the modern art exhibit. The one in the 70s and 80s was the deconstructivist exhibit.
Oh yeah, that was that one.
So Philip Johnson made two earth-shaking exhibits in established styles.
Right, and then there was an exhibit in 1943 in New York at MoMA of basically German immigrant architecture, and that featured Gropius and Mies, and I think Breuer. Maybe he got through somehow, but I don't remember. But Mendelssohn was absolutely excluded because he was not German enough. You have to understand that the Mendelssohn family, Jewish, had lived in Germany probably since the 1500s or before, that his great-grandfather, Moses Mendelssohn, had actually negotiated with the German authorities in the late 1700s, like 1790, 1795, that Jews could stay overnight in Berlin. They were forbidden.
Oh well, yeah, that was like 19.
His grandson was Felix Mendelssohn, the composer, and Eric Mendelssohn came from either, I don't know if Felix Mendelssohn had children, but Mendelssohn is from that stock. He was directly, related to all these people. And he was the greatest modernist in Germany. He had a large practice. He had good clients. He was doing department stores and houses for the most part. When the Nazis ascended, he has a book that came out, I believe, in 1929 called Eric Mendelssohn. And the guy I wrote my PhD about actually put the book together in Mendelssohn's office. He was working for Mendelssohn. So Neufeld put the book together. And Mendelssohn escaped. He went first to Britain. Then he tried Palestine for a few years. He built the Hadassah hospital on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. It's a lovely sort of Orientalist, modernist thing. He built the home for Weizmann, who became the president of Israel, the first president of Israel. He was a leader of you want some history? He was the leader of the British, of the English Jewish Zionist movement. In 1916 or 15.
Eric Mendelssohn was?
No, Weizmann.
Chaim Weizmann.
Chaim Weizmann. He was the head of the Jews in England. Most of the Jews during the beginning of World War I lived in Germany, and most of Jewish money was in Germany. And the British were doing very poorly in World War I in 1915. They were really eating it. So Weizmann went to Lord Balfour, who was highly placed in the British political hierarchy, and said, I will get the Jews to transfer all their funds to London if you give us a mandate or you give us a declaration that says we can have a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And he got that. It's called the Balfour Declaration. And it declares Palestine as a Jewish homeland, provided that all the current residents are well taken care of, and so on and so forth. And that is sort of the legal footing for the state of Israel.
My dear Nir, we are touching dangerously close to current political events.
No. This happened in 1916. As a result, in World War I, the Jews moved their money to the UK, and UK won the war.
I want to go back to architecture. Before Mendelssohn moved to Israel, he worked in England very briefly, in Britain, and he built the phenomenally gorgeous Delaware Pavilion with Chermayeff,
Yes.
Chermayeff, another somebody who escaped. I don't know if he was Jewish, but he escaped from Europe. And, it's a fantastic building, and it has remained unique, and many movies are filmed in the Delaware Pavilion. It's flowing, curving, light, all that the modernists supposedly tried to do, but failed. Gropius was just heavy-handed, ugly, just backbreaking.
I can share screen.
Yes. Oh, I don't see it. Delaware Pavilion.
Yes, I don't see anything. No images yet.
Oh, near share. Here.
So this is what modernism looked like when it started. This is as good as it ever got when it started.
Exactly. Thanks to Mendelssohn.
And you can see how huge his glass expanses are, etc. Although something tells me that
something has been remade and ruined.
The railings, maybe.
But you also see here other sides of it. This is typical Mendelssohn kind of detailing. He was, he knew how to do it.
Yeah.
And he did. Oh, what's that piece of funny stuff? He knew how to do it.
Yeah. I think here, I vaguely remember something more beautiful towards the bottom, on the ground, touching the ground. I think something has been stupidly.
It's not showing.
Well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so Mendelssohn, after staying in Israel with Palestine, then he came to the United States, and Philip Johnson went out of his way to keep him from getting commissions.
It looks like there was a grassy field, and then there was a planter box.
Yeah, I mean,
there was a ground.
The present picture is bleak. That's not Mendelssohn. Something is missing.
That's been removed.
The original picture I remember. So I'm right. The original structure was much better. Like Louis Sullivan, the Carson Peary Scott Company building, they have taken pieces off in structural remodeling. So just take a whole huge pieces off it and make it a minimalist.
What do you guys think about Pier Luigi Nervi? I think he has some very interesting structures.
Well, you know what a one-trick pony is? You slap your fingers and then the pony, raises his hoof. So the guy made some tents, and translated the tents into solid structures. It's good for one for once, but he just repeats the thing.
It's funny that they have this odd pavilion there, still very sort of funky. Nervi built a stadium in Rome, and he also designed something in Rome airport. He was a concrete guy.
Yeah.
He had a concrete mind. He was thoroughly mixed and permanently set. That was a joke. Sorry, my father used to like to say that.
I think he had made like the thinnest pieces of concrete or something that would like structurally support themselves. He had like, I think he was the one who invented. I think they were using rebar, and then he invented that they used the mesh, I think, or something, and he made that ferro cemento. It was like a thin. But I think he has some very beautiful structures.
Are you still seeing what I stopped?
No, yeah, we stopped now.
Okay.
Well, see, I think, well, sometimes he has moments like this where it's like a colonnade, and then he has an arch, and it's like really emphasized. And and then like this, where he has a
okay, so it's an interesting structure as a giant sculpture, and keeps the rain off. But is it appropriate for a bank or a school or a university or a museum? It's a one-shot thing. You pay a lot of money to have something that's interesting, visually interesting, but does it help human users? Users of what? Just to walk there and look up?
Yeah, those kind of structures, people really occupied in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, creating all kinds of interesting structural shapes. But at the end of the day, you're trying to and they're just simply naive. It's as if the structure means anything at the end of the day in the architecture. Of course it does. It wouldn't be there without it, but it's a structural expression that's important, and it's the expression of structure that is important, and not the structure per se. Every single one of the medieval cathedrals had a different structural system, and it was all a function of the size of the stones. One of the hugest, biggest, most stupid errors of modernism is that the roof is also your ceiling. It never is. For one, you have a roof on a building, and then in an attic space, and then you do your ceiling. For another, even if you do have a dome, you never show the internal dome. It's not waterproof.
Yeah,
you need
to
paint it. You need to do stuff to it. It has to be lightweight so you can get that shape. On the outside of the building, you want something that works on an urban scale. It's a different part of the exercise. That's why you have two domes. You have an internal dome and an external dome.
Okay, Nir, since you mentioned the topic now, why do you think this monumental mistake was made? It's a monumental confusion of an important point.
Because these guys who invented modernism were unexposed architecturally.
I don't buy that.
Mies never finished architecture school. Wright never finished architecture school. Corbu never finished architecture school. Gropius, I'm not sure if he did or he didn't.
No,
but they were not. You see, there are three types of buildings in the world: small, medium, and large. And each one of them has a completely different mindset. And it does come from the structure and the spans and the size of the thing. So when you're doing a small building, your roof, you'd want a flat roof. You can do it. It's not a good solution, but you can do it. If you want a very large building that is a civic building, not a warehouse or something, and it's going to have its presence. Look at Grand Central. The actual presence of the building, it's something like a 5-6 story building that is pretty open, on the inside. It just boom goes up all the way. And yes, it does have a flat roof. But it's not a flat roof. It's a real roof, but it's muted. You can't see it from the street.
There was a Leon's career sketch where he showed the three sizes, and where in modernism they're pretty much the same, but then traditionally each one.
Modernism erased all distinctions, erased all knowledge.
Yeah, the sketch was good.
Exactly.
So they didn't have they just didn't know how to do it. They couldn't if they tried. They'd never know.
I disagree with you, Nir. I think it was intentional. There was a search for novelty by destroying things, novelty through destruction. They chose to do what they did. It's not that they were ignorant.
And they had Julius Shulman, who was an amazing photographer, and he took all those photos of those. And when you look at his photos, they read differently than the actual building. His photos of all the modern architecture, they're so amazing.
Why do you think that modernist photographs of modernist buildings don't look like the buildings? Why is that?
Yeah, they hired really good photographers to go into their thing.
You answered it, Ara. You answer Nir's question, please.
Yeah. Not because they hired Julius Shulman, who was one of the most amazing photographers of the time, to go and do his thing with all their buildings.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to create a compelling image of a modernist building. It takes a rocket scientist to get a compelling image of a traditional building. Because the actual building, look, this reads, that image doesn't tell anything much really of the story. And it is a graphic image, a compelling graphic image. And look at what you have there. The stuff that is really prevalent are the people in the room and the fractality of the lights in the LA basin. That's what you're looking at. You don't see the effing building.
Yeah, it's totally deceptive. It's a deception, visual deception.
It's photography, and you can get from any modernist building a really good picture. Much harder to take a good picture of Grand Central Terminal because it can only be experienced live, walking through it.
Yeah,
a picture of it is a shadow documentation of it. Yes, it's pretty, and you can measure its prettiness inside and out, but you don't really get it until you're in it or next to it. And with modernist buildings, when you're next to them or in them, there's no there. But they do make a great picture because you can create a composition, a 2D graphic composition that's attractive. Look, go back to the previous one. The lady is smack dab in the middle of the picture.
Yes.
That's where the eyes go first. I mean,
right.
I didn't want to call it deception. I actually knew Julius Shulman in his day. I met him in LA when I was there. And I respected him, and he did good photography for what it was. But
a great photographer tries to make an attractive photograph, not to showcase the architecture. The photograph is beautiful. I agree with that. But it's the viewers of the photograph that misinterpret it.
Show us another one.
Here, let's look at his photos. Oh, this is that same house. Another photo of that same house.
I mean, you know that it's cool. You know that you can probably enjoy some time there, but it's not on account of the house. The house is actually an empty canvas, and it is the view that is what you're experiencing. So yeah, I mean, here they're showing you something. It's damn ugly, actually. Very typical 50s, 60s. But you have a huge amount of greenery implied and shown that would tip the scale fractally. And a glass box in the middle of a forest is a very good use of a glass box. It works. But a glass box in the middle of the desert,
That was the trick of Philip Johnson's glass house in the Connecticut woods. You know, the house.
trick of the glass house was that he got a lot of young guys to sleep with him. He was very, very active.
Yeah, that's true.
And it is 100% a space. You know that it has the non-glass basement part of it. The first floor.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that before you told me.
It's it's out of brick and concrete and what have you, and then you have the glass box on top of it. The glass box contains a bed, a table, and a bathroom. Do you understand the function of that space?
Yeah.
And, I commend him for doing it. His art gallery is also a little bit interesting on his property. He understood what he was doing, and he was having a good time doing it.
I told you the story. I told you the story that once I asked a New York architectural historian, I told him, you knew Philip Johnson. Was he really as evil as I think he was? And he said, no. You can accuse him of anything you want, but you would have loved him. He was so witty and intelligent and charming compared to the architects of today that are just thugs and stupid. Johnson was engaging and entertaining. You would have talked to him for 5 minutes and you would have forgiven everything that he did because he was so charming and intelligent and interesting.
And he came from money, and he was well-bred. He was a well-bred, very socially active man.
Yeah, but still, he did terrible things for which we are still paying for.
He actually gave Israel the design of its first nuclear reactor, 1954.
Yes.
Or 2 or something.
So let me ask you the question. Did Israel need a high fashion architect to design a nuclear reactor? Couldn't an engineer design the reactor?
Well, it looks a little utilitarian, what have you. But, I think he wanted to make amends, and that's how he did it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. He also designed a synagogue in New Jersey.
Oh, he did?
And I would, in order to make amends, free, completely free, pro bono.
Pro bono.
Yeah,
it's an restructure.
And I've always wondered, how could the congregation accept this gift? It's just blood tainted. Because he attended rallies in Nuremberg when Hitler was speaking.
Well, what is that? He did?
Yeah.
And he wrote about it. That he almost had an orgasm. He got so excited hearing the Führer speaking in Nuremberg. This is Johnson, and seeing all those handsome young soldiers, dressed all in leather in the uniforms. He almost had an orgasm.
And this was after it was established that
1933, 1937. Anyway, let's not get into that. Let's talk about architecture. It's bad taste to mix in gossip.
Yeah, I never knew that stuff about Philip Johnson.
Well, look, if people are going to study architectural history, then they should study history and not the censored versions that are taught in architecture school.
Yeah, it's it's really fantasy, the fantasy history.
But forget the history. What is not taught in architecture school is how to design. Architecture is not taught in architecture school.
No. Actually, architects these days are not practicing architecture. Period. It's really funny, but it's true. But it is what it is, and that's one of the reasons we're moving.
Dr. Buras, let me ask you now. You run a school, a very modest type of school, and you attract students who are interested in learning how to do architecture. When they come to you, to the Institute of Classic, to the CPI, Classic Planning Institute, do they have any idea of architecture, or do you have to tell them everything?
Oh, in that regard, we
Yes.
need to fully train them on everything. Period. Because the actual knowledge base is not found anywhere in standard schools except for Notre Dame and one or two other programs. It's simply not available. Architectural literacy, classic planning, building arts, nada. Simply doesn't exist.
Every architecture school, they throw a site at you, and then it's like, okay, now you reinvent the wheel. And the next semester, it's a different site, and then now you reinvent the wheel again. And it's like you're expected to just start from nowhere with like looking at sculptures as case studies and sometimes nature, and you don't look at other buildings, and it's like it's a really weird thing. But I mean, maybe it's good, like creatively. I don't know.
It's not good. It doesn't teach creativity. It doesn't give rules to design by. There is a whole discipline called design, and it has rules and mathematics and biology and neuroscience and invented compositional rules from 2,000, 3,000 years accumulated. That is not taught. So they tell you, look at this abstract crumpled piece of paper and design a building. That's crap. And it goes on and on for 4 or 5 years, the same old crap. It's a disservice to the students. But what shocks me is that the students never wake up. They don't open their eyes. So I have students who find me, even from my own school and internationally, and they say, we want to learn something. We want to take a mini course from you. And I start to teach them things, and then I find out, like Nir just said, they're totally ignorant. They don't know anything about architecture. The very basis of architecture, they're inarticulate about architecture. So I have to teach them everything. And supposedly they have gone through several years of architecture school and they're totally ignorant. They get something from the structures, from the material science courses. But as far as design, zero. So what are they learning? Nothing.
And it doesn't even help you with the workforce either, because you enter the workforce and now there's a whole nother thing. You're obtaining building permits, and it's like the schooling is like, that was a complete speed bump to this, and it's a complete speed bump to connecting to the tradition of how we design buildings. And it's like, it's really weird. But I think every profession is pretty much like that. Like you talk to
No.
Like I heard law school is not very similar to
No. Ara, you are a victim of brainwashing. Architecture schools say that in order to save themselves. When you get a degree in mathematics, you learn mathematics. When you get a degree in biology, you learn biology. When you get a degree in pre-med, you learn pre-med.
Well, yeah,
when
the
you
STEM
get a
courses
degree in
yeah.
civil engineering, you learn civil engineering. It's only in architecture. You finish your degree in architecture, you know nothing.
It's really true. I was amazed. I was amazed at the end of the study how little I had learned. I graduated in 1975. I was just amazed. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, same. I realized I had to learn everything on my own, and that's when I started like doing my own research and like reading things, listening to lectures and stuff. Because I would see people who knew a lot, and I was like, I'm not getting this in school, so I had to find people to listen to and things to read. But yeah, it's kind of crazy.
You know what architecture school does, and it's been doing that since the Bauhaus. It's good old Walter Gropius that instituted this psychological conditioning. You are shown an image that has no meaning, an empty square, something that Mies could design, a glass box. And then you are told 3 pages full of very interesting sounding nonsense. So you associate meaning with this meaningless image. And that's repeated for 4 or 5 years. So at the end, you come out and you think that this is meaningful architecture. It's not. These are irrelevant images that conditioning for so many years has attached a false meaning to them. But you remember, all this blah, 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 and different professors are saying the same thing. So it's consistent. You go from one course to another, one studio to another, the same thing. So it's reinforcing meaningless jabber in order to, and it's linked to irrelevant images, just blank, stupid images.
That's true. And it's just intellectual enough to keep you interested in it. Like, oh, post-functionalism. Okay, we had modernism, we had postmodernism. Now, are we in post-functionalism? Oh, after Jacques Derrida,
it is all meaningless words.
Yeah.
Meaningless words. But if you repeat meaningless words, they stick in your brain. And you can't get rid of them. I actually spent some time trying to investigate the cult phenomenon. I've written a book about architectural cults. And there were teams of experts in the 1970s who went to California, where you are, to rescue young men and women who have been taken over by cults. And they would grab them and bring them back to their families and try to deprogram them from the cult. It never really worked. Their mind was so messed up after the cult. So at best, they would just become sort of half zombies, and lead a semi-normal life, but never get back to normal, intelligent thinking, because the cult indoctrination had ruined their mind. So deprogram does not work very well.
It sounds here like we have a terrible storm. I don't think I've heard anything like it in a while.
Oh, really? Oh. Well, we can end early before the internet cuts. Okay, Ara, more pressing questions, so we can end early today. Let's wrap up on an important topic.
Oh yeah, I was curious about so is that there's a PhD program with the University of Texas, Austin, that you were saying that you've had like PhD students, or
no, I have international PhD students because
international.
Yeah, so students or a student contacts me from anywhere in the world. They're doing a PhD. They want me to be an external member on their committee.
Oh, I see. So you're not like the primary dissertation advisor. Oh, I see.
No, because my university here does not have a PhD program in architecture.
Okay. Yeah, Woodbury doesn't either. They don't do a PhD thing. Yeah, I guess a lot of universities don't.
I've had like 25 PhD students. That's not a problem at all. So when a student sends me an email, I would like you to help me or be co-supervisor of my PhD. So I told them, make sure that your university invites me formally and your thesis director invites me formally, and I'm happy to join. And then we can, I can advise you on the thesis, and then we just show up by Zoom during the defense, the dissertation defense.
People usually end up writing like 100 pages or more, or like how long?
Well, it can be anywhere from 50 to 300 pages for a PhD thesis, depending.
How much?
From 50 pages to 300 pages. I've had a 300-page thesis.
I'm sorry.
Are you guys' dissertations published online anywhere?
I think my dissertation. Is your dissertation?
Well, are you asking us?
Yeah, you too.
Me, Nir?
Yeah.
My dissertation was on algebraic structures in quantum field theory. And then I published pieces of it in 7 different articles in the Journal of Mathematical Physics.
That sounds too serious for me.
Yeah, I'm a serious guy. I'm
not a mathematician.
No, you're a joker. Tell jokes. That's why it's nice being with you.
Yeah, it's entertainment value, but I'm not a mathematician. Where I come from, if you weren't a mathematician, you really were a nobody.
Is your dissertation online, Nir?
I don't know, but I can send you a link.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Now, Christopher Alexander's dissertation,
it's going online. Sorry, it is going online
awesome.
very soon.
Might as well have
I think we're putting it on Substack. We're trying to get Substack to work.
What was Alexander's dissertation?
Yeah, Christopher Alexander's was his first book, Notes on the Synthesis of Form. So he fixed it up a little bit and published it as his first book. Now, as far as my PhD students are concerned, they usually published parts of the thesis. If a thesis is very long, you can't publish it as a paper, so you cut it, like what I did with my own thesis. You cut it into pieces and you publish each piece as a freestanding paper.
So the student actually owns the content, or the university owns it of the dissertation?
I don't know.
Yeah,
but since it's the student's dissertation, the student has the intellectual right to the material, so they can prepare an article and submit it to a professional journal, and it goes through a review process, and if it's approved, then it's published as a scientific article. I'm saying that usually a student tries to make several papers because a dissertation contains a lot of stuff. It's too much stuff for one paper. And also it's good because, if a student publishes his or her research work, then it's available. Whereas a student thesis is it's hidden in some archive somewhere. You may or may not be able to find it. So it's essentially lost. So if it's good work, if it's good research, then it's essentially lost. That's why it's worth putting in the trouble to turn it into papers for publication.
It seems like in architecture, a lot of dissertations fall into either it's like a history dissertation or like a material science dissertation. It seems like I haven't seen a lot of like design, like just like on the design aspect.
No, they wouldn't know how to begin. It is what it is. It just is what it is. And yeah. Well, eventually it's all. There was a posted somewhere on one of our. We have some interesting on WhatsApp. We have this group. There's Guy Courtois' group. Are you in on that? I'm going to send you two guys an email.
I'm not on WhatsApp groups.
I think I
That's self-preservation. What a waste of time. Anyways, but I'm kind of enjoying it. So there's that group. Then we have a salon of architecture. I'll send you invites to those two. So you don't have to. We're a salon of classical architecture. It's called Off Topic. They tried to create all these topics, and then they have one which is off topic, and that's the one that everybody goes to. So off topic, ads, Ara. Oh, I don't have you here as a.
Yeah, I think we should be wrapping up.
Okay, do you have WhatsApp, Ara? Do you have WhatsApp?
I have to. Oh, I guess I never. I have the app. I guess. Hold on, I'm gonna.
You've never used it, so get on WhatsApp and contact me, and I'll add you to that group.
Okay, cool.
This is our. What? We have 923 members on it.
Fantastic.
I have Eisenman's dissertation here. It looks like it's like scans. It says it was published in 1963. It's like he typed. It's like on a typewriter, and you could tell because each letter, it's like the ink bled a little differently.
So
So it's like
why do you have it?
it has some interesting analyses of a lot of buildings, and he has some nice. He has sketches. I mean, I think honestly, I think there's a lot to learn
Why
from.
aren't you spending your time reading Nir's book and Leon Creer's
Oh,
book?
yeah. Oh, I should get Leon
learn-
Creer's book.
You're going to learn much, much more. I guarantee it. Don't waste your time learning stuff that will confuse you.
But it's interesting how sometimes he breaks down like floor plans of built buildings, and then he shows like the process that went into.
I just told you something.
I agree. I
You're
agree.
going to
That kind of stuff is really, there's a lot of supposed analysis stuff in architecture, and none of it is relevant to design. It's sort of after the fact kibitzing, it's like, it's really the equivalent of adolescent boys talking about cars before they have a license. These kind of analyses are, they're that's not how you design. You never design from an analytical standpoint because the synthetic position is different. Synthetic position is not based on a kind of a mathematical sequence of things.
I went live on LinkedIn also today. Someone put a comment from LinkedIn. There's
Yeah,
possibly
that's
not
true.
a single design or architect education in the world today where design students are expected to address and strategize the psychological consequences of their design, how to articulate the process to non-designers, and how to use it in their design process effectively. Thanks for having these talks in public like this. Our
Yes.
pleasure.
Oh, yes, Mr. Gofke. Yes, thank you. That's what we're doing. And in addition, all our friends are writing scientific papers, accessible scientific papers that explain the psychological effects of the buildings have on users and give the rules of how to design a better building to optimize the function and the well-being of the user while the user experiences and lives in and uses the building. That's totally foreign to the architecture school. So let me go back to something that you said, Ara. You said you don't see PhD dissertations on design architecture. It is because there's nothing there. These students have no idea of how to write anything. There's no logical basis. There's no logical fundamentals of design. That logical basis belongs to us. Nir, Leon Creer, Christopher Alexander, myself, Michael Mahaffey. We are putting together the logical basis that you can do research and write a paper on that. But what's taught in architecture school is just cults. You try to write a paper, it doesn't make any sense. The only people who read such a paper are other cult members. You send it to a scientific journal, it's thrown out.
I want to second what Nikos just said. It does operate like a cult. I figured that out back in the 70s already because the whole notion of you're in or you're out is so clear cut that it really does operate like a belief system rather than a scientific system like, take nuclear physics. There's plenty of belief in it, all right? Because at some point you need to make assumptions and this, that, and the other. But it has a sequence of thinking past those points that are actually, everybody's conscious that if the original ideas, the original assumptions are wrong, all this is going to change. And they're waiting for that to happen. In a cult, your initial assumptions, you're supposed to follow them, with
religiously.
With faith, yeah. With religious faith, religious-like faith. And that is not right for free-thinking people. And your mind, and I'm going to say something you might not be happy with, but your mind was born without religion. And
that's true.
You as an individual know the true and the good and the beautiful, even before religion showed up in your life.
Yeah.
And the best religion can do with regard to people and people's behavior is offer a set of morals, which are really group agreements on how to behave. They're not ethics, which is how one ought to behave, and on the basis of what values and that open discussion of that. So you have religions where the value of life is zero, and certainly the value of life of another, despite the fact that God is all and God is life. So they're killing God when they're killing another person. So they're living in a terrible conflict, internal conflict. So we don't need any of that stuff.
Dr.
Everybody's free
Buras,
to think whatever they do.
Dr. Buras, applications to architecture, please.
The architecture is really, I think that it's a little difficult for me, because at the end of the day, I see everything coming back to the unity of truth, goodness, and beauty, which even Alexander got to at the end of his career. And I think that really commend him for continuing to be open-minded despite, his erring ways in his youth, like St. Augustine,
Okay, let's end this before.
I have a quick observation.
I'm saying everything tongue-in-cheek now. I really mean no offense.
I have a quick observation. I noticed that. So with the comment with about the psychological consequences of design, I noticed really Anne gets in that territory, and maybe it's the difference between like the male brain and the female brain, because
there is no difference.
But I feel like with us, we're more like about the material, like the object describing the actual built structure. But then with her, she's getting into the psychology of how the human being perceives.
There is no difference in the male brain and the female brain.
None?
There is one small difference. The male is more aggressive and vicious. The female is more embracing and loving because she has to be a mother. Okay, so
that's nice to hear. Yeah, up there. No, first coat.
Oh, maybe.
I think that these things are interesting, but there's a difference between our science and Ann's science, and our science is rigorous. And although Ann's science is likely correct, and I believe that she is correct, personally, I believe, okay? I don't know. I believe that she's correct. She hasn't proven it yet.
Oh, come on, Nir. Ann is a pioneer.
She's a pioneer in thinking, but what she's come up
application, applying these tools.
There is no application because there's no design coming from her work. I don't know how many people are actually using what we are learning in actual physical design.
It is a diagnostic tool that will iterate to judge a better design.
From diagnostics, yes.
Pre-occupancy evaluation, which is totally missing.
Okay, today. So that's still analytical. It doesn't tell you how to design the next thing. And for me, because we're coming from truth, goodness, and beauty, which is translated as firmness, commodity, delight, and whatever, durability, reusability, and beauty. And I start looking at, okay, what tools do we have in the toolkit to actually get this happening here and now right away so that I can propose a building for you like in the next 5 minutes?
Well, right. You are a designer. You design things that are gorgeous.
So I use those tools, but I don't come from the analytical stuff you can always analyze. At the end of the day, I have two quests in life. One is to uncover the small number of simple rules that govern the universe. And number two is it's only one building going to be built. I don't even believe in options. You do options when you don't have a clue.
But see, for
I don't
you,
believe in options.
You realized a lot of the stuff already. But for me, it's like when Anne breaks it down, where it's like, oh, the car companies are doing this, the tech companies are doing this, the business world is doing this, and the architecture world is not. For me, that helps certain things click. Where it's like, okay, I have to start really rethinking.
She's a great communicator.
Yeah,
she's far better than me. I know that.
Before we end, I want to put something in perspective. All of us contribute slightly different original thinking and practices to architecture, because architecture does not have a foundation. It's in a terrible state. So each one of us, our friends, our collaborators, are putting an important piece of what will be the foundation of architecture for the future. That's how I like to think of it.
That's definitely true. And one of us is a brown horse, one of us is a black horse, one of us is a white horse, but we're all pulling together in the same direction.
Okay, good time to end.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
Mm.
And stream.